Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Admiral Yi Part 5, Martial Lord of Loyalty by Extra History. So, last time we saw that even though Yi had been left with a tiny fleet, he managed another impressive victory against the Japanese, and we saw at the end of last episode that the Chinese Navy was ready to join forces with Yi. So, seems like things are looking up for Korea. I'm curious to see what happens by the end of this episode. This is the last episode in our series on Admiral Yi. If you've enjoyed this series, I'd appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon, which is linked down below, and will give you access to exclusive reaction content. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
When we left off, Yi had crushed the Japanese at the Battle of Myeongyang and was busy rebuilding the Korean Navy after their disastrous losses while he was being falsely accused.
Well, yes, as usual, when Yi is in charge, good things happen, and when he's kicked out, when he's demoted time and time again, bad things happen. I mean, we saw this before at the initial Japanese invasion. Those in charge of the Korean Navy basically had no response. And then last time, when Yi was kicked out of his position, the Korean Navy experienced devastating defeats against the Japanese, so they had to call Yi back in. And so now, as always, he's left as the underdog, being forced to rebuild the Korean Navy, get it back to the point it was previously at.
Now, just as he's beginning to coordinate with the Chinese Navy on how to prosecute the war, something major happens. Maybe the one event that can truly change the course of this war.
Oh.
Hideyoshi dies. 6 years and 4 months after the fateful Japanese landing on Korea, the man who started it all, the man who envisioned a vast Asian empire radiating out from Japan, died. This was a sea change. Hideyoshi had been holding the Japanese in Korea by sheer force of will. As soon as he died, the council of men who ran Japan in his stead all looked at one another and said, "Does anyone here actually want to keep fighting Korea?"
Yeah, we've heard a bit about Hideyoshi throughout this series. I'm very curious about this man, his life, his accomplishments, and I think we're going to learn more about him in the future.
Okay, show of hands, who wants to stay in Korea? Nobody? All right then. With that, they agreed to pull the Japanese forces out of there as soon as they could negotiate a deal which would let them withdraw their forces safely. But the Koreans were not so eager for peace after seeing hundreds of thousands of their countrymen slaughtered during Hideyoshi's invasion. So Admiral Yi continued to coordinate with the Chinese forces to bottle up the Japanese in one of their last strongholds.
Wow.
Port of Sun.
How about that? At many points throughout this war, had the Japanese offered to leave, end the conflict, I'm sure the Koreans would have been overjoyed, but we're at the point, especially I think with the Chinese here. The Chinese have finally arrived in full force, of course, both on land and at sea. It seems like Korea wants to keep fighting for a bit.
The Chinese army closed around the city on land, and the Korean and Chinese navies blockaded the port. Seeing the situation as hopeless, the Japanese commander decided the best option he had left was to try to bribe everybody. But each time it seemed as though he was succeeding in bribing the Chinese contingents, Yi shamed them into falling back in line.
Fantastic. I mean, look, we've seen that the Korean government and the Korean military system of this period was very corrupt. I don't know too much about China of this period. I don't know how susceptible their system or their generals were to bribes, but I can tell you this much. As long as Yi is around, no one's taking any bribes. At least not if he finds out about it.
Seeing no hope of peaceful retreat, the Japanese commander had one last plan. He dispatched a messenger boat to slip through the Chinese lines and tell the other major Japanese garrison to deploy all their ships and rendezvous with him as they tried to break their way through the Chinese and Korean blockade. But Yi got word of this plan and knew that he must prepare. The next night, November 15th, 1598, long after the sun had fallen below the horizon and the water had faded from blue to deep black, Yi told his forces to slip away from the blockade. They would try to intercept the reinforcing fleet in the fateful Noryang Strait. Near 2 a.m., the joint Korean and Chinese fleet fell upon the resting Japanese ships. At first it was chaos, cannon lighting up the water at night, but soon the Japanese tried to regroup. Despite being caught off guard, they still had 500 ships to the combined 150 of Yi and the Chinese.
My goodness. Not in any situation can Yi be allowed to outnumber his enemy. I mean, basically every battle we've seen, he's been outnumbered, not to mention outnumbered to a pretty remarkable extent. Even now, with the help of the Chinese, we're talking about a 500 to 150 ship advantage for the Japanese. Really incredible how Yi, as a constant underdog, can keep winning all of these battles. That's why I said earlier in this series, Yi is often compared to Admiral Nelson, and that's fair enough. But, to be honest, some aspects of his career, not every aspect, remind me a little bit more of Thomas Cochrane. You know, being an underdog, being underappreciated, always being outnumbered, those sort of things. Now, of course, Cochrane and Yi are very different in a lot of ways. Their stories aren't really comparable, but some of those elements do seem a bit similar to me.
And moreover, they were fueled by desperation. If they lost here, who knows if they'd ever see Japan again. But the Allied forces had two advantages going for them as well. For one, they had once again caught the Japanese in a strait where they could not easily maneuver their massive fleet, and two, even if they could maneuver, many of their ships were transports, which were only useful for boarding and arquebus fire in a fight. In desperation, the Japanese attacked, driving their ships through the withering hail of the enemy cannonade. Unfortunately for Yi, the Chinese commander, who wasn't used to fighting the Japanese and had no experience with Yi's long-range form of naval warfare, charged forward to meet the Japanese fleet and prepared to engage them in hand-to-hand combat. The Chinese commander was surrounded. Dozens of Japanese ships descended on the Chinese flagship. Yi ordered his own ship to attempt a rescue. Yi's flagship plunged into the midst of the enemy. He was committed now. It would be fierce, close combat the rest of the way. Exactly the type of fight Yi had always tried to avoid.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, we talked about much earlier in this series how Japan excelled on land. You know, they excelled at martial hand-to-hand combat, whereas Korea did not excel at that, but they were a bit better on the naval side of things, though Korea as a whole was just way less militarized than Japan was. So I'm sure in a naval engagement like this, what the Japanese want most of all is to be able to close in and, you know, get some of that hand-to-hand combat. That's probably where they would do the best in a naval context. And Yi, knowing that, has tried to avoid that up until this point, but unfortunately, sometimes you gotta face circumstances that you didn't plan for, and as always, Yi is brave and daring.
The vessels were so close that unarmed Korean sailors began throwing bundles of burning sticks down on the enemy decks. As Yi's ship broke through the waves, he spotted 3 of the enemy's admirals standing on the deck of one of the Japanese ships attacking his ally. And so, Yi drew his bow and loosed. One of the admirals fell. For a moment, there was almost a silence in the midst of the fighting, as everybody looked to see where that arrow had come from. Then one of the Japanese admirals roused himself from his shock and shouted that it was Yi.
Admiral on Admiral combat, how about that?
All the ships must attack Yi. All the Japanese vessels turned and began to give chase to Yi's flagship. But now it was the Chinese admiral's turn to take action, and his ships tore into the vessels pursuing Yi. Soon the fight was on the deck of the Chinese flagship, Chinese Dao sparking against Japanese katana. In the end, the Japanese boarding parties were repelled, but many from both sides lay dead on the deck. As dawn began to bring light back to the scene, everyone could see how badly the Japanese were faring. They attempted to flee, but Yi would have none of it. These people who...
Dude, the Japanese cannot catch a break. They finally got some of that close quarters hand-to-hand combat. It isn't doing nothing for them. They outnumber Yi and the Chinese by a massive amount. That's not going to help them. They try to flee. Yi doesn't let them go. I mean, Yi is absolutely relentless. That is a part of his character that has been displayed very well throughout this series.
Who had come to his land, who had despoiled his home, who had slaughtered his people and endangered his nation? No, he would not let them flee. He grabbed the mallet from the ship's drummer and began to beat the war drum himself.
I will say also something else about Yi is that he is very involved, right? I mean, he is, he's the guy in charge. But he's not the type of commander, he's not the type of admiral to just sit back and give orders. He is right in there alongside his men, whether it be banging on the war drum, loosing arrows, fighting hand-to-hand. I imagine, we've seen several instances of Yi training up his men when he was working at a fort or in other contexts, I imagine that when he was training his men, he was really down there, man to man, instructing them. You know, he seems like the kind of leader who is right there alongside his subordinates, alongside his men, which I imagine helped a lot with inspiring people and encouraging them to keep going.
Urging his ships to go ever faster. The haunting echo of the drum pushed the fleet on. Its beat hounded the Japanese, bit at their heels. His fleet moved like it never had before, the drum steadily beating like the call of the god of war. They were upon the Japanese. Cannons roared, arquebuses answered. Shouts and screams were heard as ship after ship was caught by the pursuing fleet, possessed by the beat of the drums of war. But then, just for an instant, the drums faltered. Seen by no one but his son, his nephew, and a loyal servant, Yi had been struck by a stray arquebus ball.
No!
They rushed to his side as he slumped against the drum, trying to aid him, asking if there was anything they could do. With his last breath, he said to them, "We are about to win this war. Keep beating the drum. Do not let anyone know of my death."
You know, wow, first off, another display of his bravery, drive, and commitment to the cause, but also, I was talking about Thomas Cochrane and Admiral Nelson earlier. Well, there you go. Admiral Nelson, of course, died during the Battle of Trafalgar, one of, if not the biggest battle of his career. Here we have another parallel with Yi. It appears that he's about to pass away during this oh-so-important battle. I don't know if this is the most important battle of his career. We've seen a lot of important ones, but it certainly seems like an extremely important engagement. And, yeah, Yi has lost his life during it. He's given his life for the cause, basically. And with his dying breath, he's telling them to keep going. Wow.
His son picked up the mallet and continued the beat. Dressed in Yi's armor, his son and his nephew took up the command. For hours, they were Yi, commanding as he would, with all his ability and skill.
Wow.
None of Yi's officers ever realized he had fallen until, as the battle was closing, the Chinese flagship was once again surrounded.
That's incredible. Taken up by your son, your nephew, your family. They take your place, and seems like they did a pretty good job of it. Though, the Japanese were already on the back foot at that point.
Yi's son ordered his ship into the thick. They darted forward, breaking the cordon around the Chinese flagship, helping the Chinese to escape.
Wow.
The fighting was fierce, but it was near the last of it. And as the day closed, the Chinese admiral sailed toward Yi's flagship and called out to thank Yi for saving him, to invite Yi to celebrate the glorious day together.
Oh,
but he was met by Yi's son. Instantly, he knew what had happened, and 3 times he threw himself to the deck, wailing and crying out, "Even after death, you saved my life."
Wow.
This was the...
Yeah. Yi really is that kind of guy. Even after his death, he's still winning battles and saving lives. Truly, truly remarkable.
last battle of the war. 300 Japanese ships were destroyed or captured. After this, the remaining Japanese garrisons would either be captured one by the Chinese and Korean forces, or slip back to Japan to fight one last struggle before Tokugawa's ascension as shogun. At last, the Imjin War was at an end. Hideyoshi's dream of a Japanese empire was broken. Korea was free, but Yi would never see it. Thousands turned out to see his body returned to his small home village. People lined the road and wailed at the passing of a man they may never have met.
I'm sure. I think they're about to get into it now, but I do wonder how Yi has been remembered. If you're Korean or you have any experience with Korean culture, I'd be curious to know how well Yi is remembered in Korea. Is his memory maintained? Is he still talked about? Is he somewhat of a national hero? That's what it would seem like to me, but I have no idea. So if you're familiar with that culture, I'd be interested to hear.
The Chinese admiral wrote for him a eulogy, and even the court and the king tried to make their recompense. And so passed the man so ill-treated in life.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the court and the king are finally like, ooh, yeah, he was actually pretty cool. Okay, y'all mistreated him for his entire life. You were the main roadblock in his advancement upwards. He kept getting blocked, he kept getting demoted, pushed back. But that was the thing about Yi, and I mean, really, that's one of the things that makes his story so special. You know, every time he got knocked down or he got blocked, he would get back up and keep moving forward. I mean, really, his persistence is key to the story of Admiral Yi.
so often demoted and accused, the man who would forever be known as the Martial Lord of Loyalty.
Yeah. And an absolutely fair title that is, the Martial Lord of Loyalty. I mean, you could say a lot of things about Yi, but he was absolutely loyal to not a particular faction, or I would say not even to a particular government, but to his country. You know, that's what he was loyal to. He wanted to keep pushing that cause forward, do everything he could to help Korea and to frankly save Korea from this Japanese invasion. Truly a remarkable fellow. Once again, I'm curious about Yi's legacy today. If you have any insight on that, please leave it down below. I'd be interested to hear. So yeah, I had a great time with this series. If you guys did, please leave a like, subscribe, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. Now, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.